Hello and welcome to today's seminar in the Smart Mobility Connection series. My name is Harja Shahab and I am the Traffic 21 Women in Transportation Fellow. The Smart Mobility Connection series is sponsored by the Traffic 21 Institute and the Mobility 21 University Transportation Center as an opportunity for faculty to showcase their current transportation projects. It is also an opportunity for students, fellow faculty, deployment partners, and the broader community to engage and network with researchers, highlight opportunities for involvement, and foster future interdisciplinary collaboration. Please note, this session is being recorded and all participants' microphones are muted. To ask a question, please send a message through the chat box. You do not need to wait until the end of the presentation to send your questions. Now, I would like to introduce today's speaker. Pulkit Grover is the Angel Jordan Associate Professor at CMU. His main contributions to science are towards developing and experimentally validating new science of information for energy-efficient communication, distributed control, neural inference, sensing, and stimulation. Pulkit received the 2010 Best Student Paper Award at IEEE Conference on Decision and Control, the 2011 Eli Jury Dissertation Award from UC Berkeley, the 2012 Leonard G. Abraham Best General Paper, a 2014 NSF CAREER Award, a 2015 Google Research Award, a 2018 Inaugural Award from the Chuck Noll Foundation for Brain Injury Research, the 28th Spira Excellence in Teaching Award at CMU, and the 2019 Best Tutorial Paper Award, IEEE ComSoc. He's leading the SharpFocus Center, a multi-institution effort aimed at and msec-scale non-invasive sensing and simulation of the brain. Please help me welcome Pulkit Grover as he tells us about his University Transportation Center project towards new accessible neural sensing technologies for portable use during driving. Over to you, Pulkit.
Oh, I successfully unmuted myself, or on request. Thank you, Hajra, for such a warm introduction. This project is, I think, an experiment, much as all projects are. I'm trying to understand how neural sensing technologies, especially portable ones, could be used in driving, and how they might need to change in order for them to be actually useful. And so I'll describe some of our efforts in that direction. But really, I'm very open to collaborations and feedback from everybody here on how we can improve this and align this more with driving efforts and accessibility efforts broadly. I also want to thank Lisa Kay as well as Stan Calwell for helping me think through this proposal and guiding me through the process of sort of how to think about alignment with the center. It's been a great experience. Okay, so what am I? So the title is kind of long, towards new accessible neural sensing technologies for portable use during driving. I want to talk about accessibility quite a lot here, and portability. So I think those are the two keywords that I'll talk a lot about in the talk. And of course, the goal is neural sensing. So we want to understand applications of brain imaging, brain sensing in the context of driving and mobility 21 broadly. Okay. The goal of my research lab at this point largely is how to monitor and affect neural activity, especially in the context of the talk today, for diagnosis and treatments by developing minimally invasive or non-invasive solutions and making sure that these technologies are equitable. So that's one of the things I'll talk about a lot today. And there are many advances that have been made here, but it's unclear what you can do non-invasively and how well. And that's one of the issues that I strive to understand. My background is of an information theorist, and I like to use tools from information theory, from AI, but also hardware design to bring solutions to these problems. And this talk sort of by its very nature, the discussion that I'll have in this talk is integrative, in the sense that how do we integrate hardware, software, all the platforms that we have to enable access to all at all times. And an example to keep in mind as we discuss this, that could be a nice representative example, is we want access for all epilepsy patients when driving. So what if one sort of applications to think about is, if you could sense that somebody is having an epileptic seizure, what sort of assistance could you provide them? And on my end, the angle is, can we sense epileptic seizures, detect epileptic seizures of patients? Okay. So just broadly, and I don't think in this community we talk a lot about neuro technologies, so sort of a very crude introduction. This is not meant to be in any sense comprehensive. Broadly speaking, neuro technologies are advancing very, very rapidly in each of the applications discussed here. There's a community of researchers advancing and developing the solutions, testing them for various disorders and healthy human brain function as well. Here's an EEG system that we developed in 2017, but of course EEG is a 100-year-old technology. So we had a high density EEG system that we used to understand whether we can better detect attention. So another application that I'll talk about is detecting attention, inferring attention of drivers. That's still ongoing work, but I can talk about some results there. Functional brain imaging using fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging. You put currents in the brain to treat disorders today. You put light in the brain to sense the activity at lower time scales, but finer spatial scales. You also put currents in the brain down here to suppress tumor growth, which is an increasingly widely adopted tumor treatment. So all of this is happening, and a question is, what of these can we use to provide improved driving accessibility? Towards that, here is the vision and here are the questions. So this is in Pennsylvania. If there's a patient with epilepsy, you need to be seizure free for at least 6 months to be able to drive, and you have to be certified by I think a neurologist or some clinician that you have been seizure free for 6 months. And so maybe seizure free for 6 months means that your drugs are working really, really well, or your surgical treatment worked really, really well. And it's, happens for some patients, it doesn't happen for many others. And so one question could be, hey, if we could detect seizures during driving, could we develop some technology, or some of the technologies that other people in this meeting are developing, could they be leveraged or molded towards providing the right assistance during the driving task? That's one of the questions that really I would have for you. It's not something I'm going to discuss a lot in the talk. Then there's similarly accidents. A lot of the accidents today are caused by lack of attention. And if you could decode the driver's attention, we have so many ways of getting distracted. I have 2 kids now, so there is additional distraction in the car. If we could detect the driver's attention, it could use neural signals in conjunction with eye tracking and other ways in which we might detect attention. But a reliable detection of attention, how could you use it to warn or assist the driver as needed? It's a question that one could ask. Now, what is going on in this parallel world of neuroscience and neuroengineering is that algorithms, especially machine learning algorithms, are advancing rapidly. Data collection is improving, and we are able to do automatic seizure detection. This is kind of solved problem in a way. Algorithms for these are quite reliable at this point and are used in the clinic all the time. Portable systems exist. I didn't mention that here because that's not algorithms, but portable neural sensing systems that are wireless exist and are commonly used in labs, sometimes in the clinic. You can decode attention quite reliably, visual as well as auditory attention, under controlled conditions in a lab. So how well that translates into practice is something we don't quite understand yet, but results are quite promising, at least in lab settings. And broadly, I think, and I put this really broadly here, but if you want to classify your brain state, there are good techniques and good algorithms that are rapidly advancing towards that. And some of them we are involved in developing. Some of them I just learn every week from the literature, and it's amazing to see what all is going on there. So one of the issues that I want to bring out today, that is a critical issue here, is that we want, for the goal of driving and for the goal of accessibility, one of the things that I want, and that's one of the core missions of my lab, is that it should be hardware that works for everybody. It shouldn't just work for certain classes of individuals or something. It should be an equitable, everybody should be able to access this hardware, and it should be installed quickly. This is the EEG recording, electroencephalography recording. These are electrodes placed on your scalp when you are being diagnosed for epilepsy, if you have had a seizure. And if you see certain patterns, you could infer that that's epilepsy. And these classification algorithms are quite reliable at this point. And so one can ask these kinds of questions. If you have questions right now, do feel free to write them, and I'm happy to take them on the way as well. I know that I can't access the questions myself. But one thing, again, in terms of background that I would mention here is that when we think of epileptic seizures, classically, if you have seen one, or if you're just sort of vaguely aware, but do not have a close acquaintance who has seizures or are otherwise aware because of research reasons or general awareness. The classical version of seizures that we are aware of are called tonic-clonic seizures, where you have very sort of classic patterns of how in the patient's movements the seizure is reflected. But there are many patients who don't exhibit that classic sort of response to seizures. And this particular recording that I took, this is from Wikipedia, but it's something called absence seizures, where the patient just zones out for a few minutes. These seizures are hard to detect. Oh, sorry, these epilepsies are hard to diagnose because the patient usually arrives in the clinic much later, because you don't diagnose it as epilepsy unless you start measuring these brain waves and saying, oh yeah, this is the classic epilepsy signature. It just looks like, oh, that person zoned out for a few seconds or a minute. But of course, in driving context, that can be really bad because you haven't diagnosed that this person has epilepsy, or you have diagnosed, but you're thinking, oh, it doesn't happen as much anymore. But if you have persistent recording for a long time, then that can really help identify seizures when they happen, and then maybe again take some corrective actions, have warnings to the passenger or something like that. That's open to interpretation and creativity. That's not something I've thought about very deeply. What could be done once you detect it? Okay, so one of the issues that this grant has really helped support, that I'm quite excited about, is bias in neurotechnologies, which is, again, we want to improve how accessible these technologies are, how well they perform for everybody. And in the case of EEG, again, these electrodes that sense brain waves, the critical issue is how well is the contact with the scalp? Is it a snug contact? And what we had noticed a year before this award started is that neurotechnologies can be biased at a device level, the hardware level. So again, the technology that we'll talk about today, EEG, is biased towards straight hair and doesn't work well with black hair, for instance, or coarse or curly hair, broadly speaking. So it speaks to sort of the biases of the inventors who came up with the technology back in the day, how they were thinking about it. But it also sort of speaks to us needing to revisit whether technologies that we have today for measuring health broadly work with everybody. And more recently, with collaborators at CMU, Suzina Wood and Jana Kinnestorfer, both faculty in BME, we have started looking at similar biases in another sensing modality, FNIRS. But that's not our focus for today. That throws light into the brain. Today's focus is more EEG, which has this sort of classic view that you put many electrodes on the head and are able to sense the brain signals. So I'm going to take a detour, get into accessibility for today's talk, just to lay it out. I'm going to get into accessibility, making EEG work for black hair types. Then I'm going to step out of it and quickly talk about two other efforts that we are pursuing in parallel with this. One is about making EEG more easily installable. And the second is about developing better algorithms for understanding the brain state. So I'll talk about both of those as well. Keep an eye on the chat, though I don't think I'm going to get questions directly, but please feel free to ask questions. Okay, this talk is short. It has, I can't remember, but like 14, 15 slides. Okay, so the first topic is equitable neural sensing and stimulation. And again, I'm showing this. This is the classical view of EEG, how neural sensing modalities are applied, and you'll find many systems that are wearable. This particular system is actually installable in minutes. You dip it in saline, put it on, walk around and stuff, right? And so it's really nice. Things are becoming more easy to use, but they don't work with hair types of Black people today, and likely of many other cultures as well. And so this is something that is surprising. It might come as a surprise to you, given that EEG, this neural sensing modality, is a century-old modality. It is used in diagnosis and treatments of pretty much every neurological disorder that you can think of, including epilepsy, brain injury, stroke. In epilepsy, it's the gold standard for seizure detection, which means that if you have a seizure, the only way to detect whether you have epilepsy, diagnose whether you have epilepsy, is to get an EEG. But as I mentioned, it doesn't work well with coarse and curly hair types common in Black individuals. This was noted in our lab by an amazing Black student who joined the lab 5 years back, 6 years back, Arnella Rien, when she noticed that this system didn't work on her hair. There was no publication on this until 2020, only anecdotal awareness. This, of course, has many clinical and neuroscientific implications, and it affects treatments of disorders as well, such as neurostimulation and tumor treating fields. There's a chat, yay, okay. Okay, so there's a question. What is the current method of detection for epilepsy for those with coarse and curly hair if EEG is not the best detection method? Thank you. So I'm going to talk about some clinical studies that we are conducting currently. And we are working with a clinician, Dr. Christina Patterson at University of Pittsburgh on this, who is on the project as well. According to her knowledge and sort of interactions with her, but actually we have interacted with EEG technologists, some across the country, but a lot in Pittsburgh for obvious reasons. We find that some technologists are skilled and they're like, I'm going to make this technology as it exists work with Black hair. And it kind of sort of works, but sometimes it doesn't. So in her experience, she has seen cases where EEG was completely uninstallable, and I'll talk about that as well, on patients, on Black patients. Like she had example patients, they really needed the EEG at the time, but the technologists, even those very intimately familiar with Black hair, could not just install the existing systems. The existing systems are just not geared to do that. In our own experience, now we have done clinical studies. We are doing clinical studies in part supported by this project. 3 patients we have monitored so far, all suffering from epilepsy. For the first patient, we had poor quality signals, but still contact with the scalp using existing techniques. In fact, we improved the clinical techniques that they were using. I'll talk about some solutions that we have proposed. And for the second patient, the clinicians themselves noticed that the existing solutions did not work well with Black hair. There was an electrode hanging off and stuff like that. And just to get to the next slide here, I'll ignore this. Like, we know that there is a potential for misdiagnoses. So in clinical systems, you can have misdiagnoses, you can have discomfort. And EEG technicians, while they try to address these issues, sometimes EEG is still not obtainable. It is surprising to learn, and the more we learn about this, it's actually pretty bad. There are examples of studies where labs, so these are neuroscience lab like my lab, and my lab is more neuroengineering, but the classic neuroscience labs at CMU and Pitt and everywhere else in other universities, many of them in their IRB protocols, in their questionnaires, they'll say, do you have this hair type? And if they do, you can't participate in this study. And so there are these kind of documented exclusion criteria. So not only are clinically we limiting, which is bad enough, right? That we are limiting who we have good solutions for. Neuroscientifically, we just bias this data without getting into the details of the right-hand side. I do want to mention, so what would happen, let's say, this is my based on discussions with clinicians, this is my understanding. What happens is a Black patient arrives in the clinic. The technologists, if they're familiar with Black hair, they'll do something to make it work. It'll kind of sort of work, and you'll get some signal. But then you'll be like, oh, wait, maybe I got good signal from like 60% of the electrodes, not from the other 40%. The other 40% ends up getting either, like they'll not dismiss it completely, they'll look at it, but they'll be like, I don't see any epilepsy signatures there. And so you can have misdiagnoses of that nature. When that happens, the patient will go back home because they'll say, oh no, this was just a seizure. Not every seizure is epilepsy, you're fine. Or this is something else, let's figure out what that something else is. In the process, epilepsy can start advancing because epileptic seizures, the networks often get worse over time. And then maybe the only solution is surgical. So it can cause, at least we don't know of an instance per se, but based on discussions with clinicians, it is possible that it has caused delays in treatments of people, leading them to have more invasive treatments. The invasive treatments, by the way, look like today, two types. One, you go and take out a part of the brain to treat the patient. Very common treatment called resection. The other is ablation. You sort of focus waves on the part of the brain to kill a part of the tissue. That is being thought to, or is estimated to, start seizures. Okay, let me see. Okay, no more questions. Thank you. Okay, so the solution that we proposed, this was led by a Black student in the lab, at the time an undergraduate student, Arnel Etienne. She identified the problem. This is the picture on the left. Then she said, okay, let me develop a solution that, she thought through the problem and was like, let me develop a solution that works well with the culture, the hairstyles that are commonly used in Black culture. So she cornrowed the hair of participants in ways to expose scalp at locations where clinicians record EEG. So these are some standard locations where these neural recordings are made, and a clinician understands how a signal should look like from these different locations and what a seizure-like activity at any of these locations means for the epilepsy of a particular patient. And then she and many others in the lab developed techniques to to develop electrodes that can be utilized to better improve the quality of signals that you're acquiring beyond what is possible even with just braiding. And so to check that, you always have to quantify. Visuals are nice, but let's quantify how much the improvement is. And so in the lab settings, one measure of how good the contact of the electrode that is sensing these EEG signals, that is measuring these potentials, is this impedance, the electrode scalp impedance. And this electrode scalp impedance reduces by a factor of 15 or 18 by using the servo electrodes, the servo systems that she has developed. Braiding itself helps quite a lot, but not as much if you also use the servo electrodes. And so we are now, there's a startup that is associated with this, Precision Neuroscopics. The student, Arnel, is now associated with the startup as well, and she's trying to market these products, get them to labs in an accessible way. Sort of good pricing and good thought has gone into that. We also showed that if you use unbraided gold cup, sorry, this is not gold, this should be gold cup electrodes, which are the classical sort of clinical systems that are used today, or you braid them, you get improvement in how the fraction of time for which the impedance is good. But if you use the servo systems, then you get good impedance, good quality signals, presumably all the time. The signals were not recorded in this study. We only recorded impedance. What we're doing now is a clinical study in the epilepsy monitoring unit at Pitt. This is again, that's Arnel. This is Dr. Jasmine Kwasa, who joined the lab recently, and Dr. Christina Patterson, who is a collaborator at Pitt Children's Hospital, who's sort of helping us think through the epilepsy application. Here is a Black patient, 9-year-old girl who has several electrodes placed on her scalp. And what we were able to show, I'll not get into the details of it, maybe I'll give an example, but across many metrics for EEG, you see improvement using servo clips, the clips that we have developed, versus the existing systems. Existing systems, you see a lot of noise here. I mean, people who are used to seeing EEG will look at this and be like, this data is too noisy, versus this data is much cleaner. You'll also see that EEG decays. This is the power spectral density. So it decays like 1 over F. It has peaks at the right places. So these are the kinds of signatures that a clinician or a neuroscientist would look at in order to understand, decode the brain function, including attention, including the epileptic seizures, and so on. So what does the activity look like? This is something that Dr. Kwasa will present next month in the American Epilepsy Society meeting, and the manuscript is in preparation. Okay, let me see if there are more questions. Okay, so there were no standard metrics. Some challenges that we faced in doing this, there were no standard metrics for quantifying EEG signal quality. There was difficulty in convincing others that this is actually needed, this kind of a system that works for everybody. There were questions like, is it just nice to have, or is it actually needed? And these were questions by reviewers of our proposals. And to answer them, we sort of collected data that we were like, oh wait, labs exclude Black people or Black hair types, many Black hair types from their population. That, you know, if you have 1 or 2 electrodes off, it sounds like, oh, okay, you have 20 electrodes, 1 or 2 off will not make that big of a difference. But talking to Dr. Patterson, if you have poor contact of even a few electrodes, it can lead to misdiagnosis, either not detecting epilepsy or detecting epilepsy incorrectly, leading to, you know, either a delayed surgical intervention or an incorrect surgical intervention or incorrect treatment. Or maybe suboptimal should be the word instead of incorrect. Dr. Patterson again has observed cases where systems were uninstallable. So you know, even with EEG technologists, experts with Black hair were not able to install these systems. Right, Stan, great question. How can the findings of this research inform policy or regulations to increase personal mobility? So that's where I'm sort of trying to make a connection with epilepsy people. Right now, any epilepsy patient is not allowed to drive a car unless they can show that they haven't had a seizure in the last 6 months. And I'm wondering if, you know, the core of this proposal is, if we can give you reliable signatures of epilepsy, are there driving assistive technologies that could be used to assist people in being able to take control of their own lives by being able to drive better? So that's one. Second is attention. So while we are testing this in the clinic, and that has advantages because we have patient population, we have expert EEG installers there. And I'll talk about quick installation, which is not something that clinicians do in a little bit. But variability and being able to decode attention is the second part of it. There is actually a part of my own research group, as well as many other research groups that are dedicated, or not dedicated, but at least we are working in some small way. But Marlene Berman's research group at CMU, as well as Barb Cunningham's research group at CMU, are looking at respectively visual and auditory attention. And we are working with them to understand how well can you decode visual and auditory attention using EEG. So if EEG is installable, you have good quality EEG for everybody, then presumably you can decode where the attention is. And again, that could be used to supplement the drivers. Sorry, the next question showed up, but let me look at it in a bit. But whatever the drivers is doing at the time. That's a great question, Hojab Behruz. That is the solution improvement only dependent on hardware, or is there an applied AI/ML algorithms to improve the results? I'll talk about the AI/ML algorithms to improve the results in a bit. But to be transparent here, we have used EEG signals to decode attention, and we have gotten good accuracies. But in there, we used classic algorithms. We did not advance on the algorithms. Like we used SVM, we've used variations on kernel SVM and so on, but that's where we stand. The advancement was more on hardware in there. I'll talk about one algorithmic advance that is novel, that is that we are studying how it can be used to understand brain state better, which is about localizing level of activity. So think of mean square level of activity. There are no tools currently that allow you to do that for the brain. We discovered this problem because we are still interested in stroke and epilepsy, where silences in the brain indicate something interesting. But there was no way to detect silences non-invasively. So we have advanced on that. I'll have 1 or 2 slides on that towards the end as well. Thank you. I'm glad the questions are sort of leading the talk forward very nicely. So thank you all for asking questions. Right. So there are many reasons for why you want to do work like this. But we didn't find a home program at the NIH and the NSF, so big thanks to Mobility 21 for giving us this big push to get these results, especially when it comes to clinical testing of these systems. So that requires a lot of individuals talking about a lot of individuals, people who design these systems, people who go in and braid the hair of participants to get good quality EEG, people who do the data analysis, people who re-instrument the systems so that they can fit the clinical systems to get the better hair quality. Other co-mentors of mine in the process who have been able to sort of guide this team collectively. This has been a great experience to see all of that come together. So we have now started supplying labs with several systems. There are studies initiated at the universities to quantify bias in participation, improving EEG quality broadly. And then similar issues affect TD fields, as I mentioned, current stimulation, FNIRS. We have recently received funding to study FNIRS, which is the system for sensing brain activity by throwing light into the brain, in how it suffers from its own biases of skin color. So this has become a much sort of involved and broader project in the last year, which I'm very grateful about. Now, coming again to driving, one of the issues is you want to be able to install these EEG systems quickly. And so towards that, in a collaboration with Precision Neuroscopics, again enabled by Mobility 21 grant, we are developing modular EEG systems that are quickly installable. So here are some pictures. This is very much work in progress. We presented it again at the American Epilepsy Society meeting last year. But the key advance here is, okay, one thinking about the way people use EEG is they sometimes, the way you might want to decode things like attention from EEG, or once you know what you're trying to look for, you know where to place electrodes. And so this system allows you to place electrodes depending on where you want to put it quickly in like 5 minutes. What we're also trying to do is we have developed a new material that gives you high quality of signals for a very long time. And this material is a conductive sponge electrode. So what it does is you make it wet and it really has very good conductivity. And if it touches the scalp, it's a conductive sponge. So it's comfortable to wear, which is important for wearability. And then it's able to get good quality signals from the scalp when it is wet. But because it's a conductive sponge interface, even as it dries out, it maintains a reasonably good quality of signal, which is not true of current sponge interfaces. That the picture that I showed in the beginning is an EEG system sold by Philips that is all sponge based, but it completely fails in 20 minutes once the sort of saline dries out. That's not the case for these conductive sponges. And we showed that in a publication in 2020. We are now actually developing a system to rehydrate these sponges over and over again to just keep a very high signal quality over time. So that's one of the efforts as well. And then finally, a third effort, which comes to algorithms, is, how can you use these EEG systems to make inferences relevant to disorders? Here is a wave that is a marker of migraines and also of brain injuries. But in this context of migraine and a migraine attack, if we could detect these waves non-invasively, we could detect that a person is having a migraine attack before it becomes a full-blown migraine attack. And so we are working with PIT clinicians on this and are getting data on patients who have these waves and are trying to detect them non-invasively. We have 6 patient data so far, and our algorithm has good success. And there was a question, I forget by who, sorry, on the algorithm itself, I think Behruz. And so the novelty of our algorithms in the context of machine learning and signal processing is that while the classical techniques in neuroscience have been developed to track where the activity in the brain is, we are trying to develop techniques to understand where the activity is not. And that's important because these waves of migraine, for instance, or stroke for that matter, or tumor for that matter, they're all silences in the brain. So towards that, we have developed this algorithm. We call it Silence Map. The results appeared this year in Nature Com Biology, where we show that these are the first algorithms. This is our algorithm. This was the ground truth silence in these 3 patients. And we were able to localize these silences very well, whereas the existing algorithms sort of fail completely because they're just not designed for this problem. Again, the question is, how can we use this in these contexts? So again, it can We think we will have good, so far a few patients, but we think we'll have good accuracy in detecting spreading depolarizations, which are waves that are behind migraine, but also brain injuries. But I think in this context, maybe migraine is more important. They're also associated with epileptic seizures, which is a connection that needs to be explored more deeply and so on. But what these tools also give you, it's a localization of silence. What it is getting at is activity levels in the brain. Where is there high activity? Where is there low activity? Now we have tools to image that non-invasively to certain accuracy. Maybe that, in terms of machine learning algorithms, it gives you a better feature space to be able to classify the brain state of the individual who is driving. So this is the last slide to summarize. Integrated technological advances for neurotechnology accessibility. So we advanced on hardware to make it accessible by all hair types, but also to make it quick to apply on all individuals, so that you don't, typical setup time for EEG in the clinic and neuroscience labs is 30 to 45 minutes. That's not the amount of time an individual is going to spend setting up a system before they go start driving. The only neuroscientific systems that are quicker to apply work for 20 minutes, which again is not something that people are going to use because most people, will have a longer commute, for instance. And so we are trying to address those problems by both new materials as well as new solutions there. And we're developing algorithms for high resolution inference of neural activity, but activity level. So this is mean square level instead of mean from non-invasive recordings. We are, because we're getting this data, this is great. So we are working on detecting seizures and attention from these signals, ongoing collaborations with clinicians at PIT and attention experts at CMU, which is just extremely helpful. We have shared students and postdocs with them. And then the question for you all is other ways that you could think of where neural sensing technologies, complemented maybe with other technologies, could be used for assisting in driving. Getting a question here. What is the goal time to be able to have the EEG set up? That's a great question. At this point, we think 5 minutes is what we want, or 5 minutes or less. So what we are aiming for is something like what the Philips EEG system does, which is, I think it's Philips EGI. Philips EGI system does, which is that you dip it in saline, you put it on, you have to dry it out a bit and so on, so that you just don't have saline all over you, and then you can go around. But that dries out in 20 minutes. And so we want it modular aspect, but also conductive sponges. We are hoping that it can work with that amount of time in setup, which is, I think it amounts to 5 minutes to 10 minutes. And so that amount of setup time and then the usage time can be multiple hours at least. Any other advice, even if you have it offline for me, my email is my first name, pulkit@cmu.edu. If you have advice or suggestions on how these technologies could additionally be used in driving, maybe any new hardware or algorithmic problems that imposes, our team is very excited to sort of co-work with people and identify new problems. Stan, you have a question.
Hi, Pulkit. Thank you very much for the presentation. I was going to write this, but it's kind of complicated, so I'll just try to voice it. But lots of companies are looking at kind of putting cameras in vehicles in order to help with the human vehicle interface. All levels of automated system, anywhere from level 2 to level 4. So is there a way, so how does the neural approach differ from like a camera approach typically looking at the eyes?
Right.
And so maybe that's another way that this could be an application that is superior to that. I understand it's more, physically invasive, but can you just talk about what the pros and cons of that approach might be?
No, that's excellent. So I think, eye tracking technology, physical sort of movements and camera-based technology can sometimes predict very well where the attention is. But we also know from neuroscientific experiments, but I think everybody can relate to their own personal experiences as well, that you don't need to move your eyes to change your focus, especially when you are less focused. And so I think in there, so I think the way I see it honestly is few electrodes. We'll have to choose a few places where we place electrodes, and we'll embed them in something simple and easy like a wearable cap, and hopefully use just dry electrodes that don't require any wetting, or maybe very, very little wetting that is sort of, there are tubes in the cap that will supply that, so you don't have to actually like dip the cap or something. So you'll have few electrodes. You'll have it complemented by eye tracking or otherwise sort of camera-based imaging of the physical movements to more reliably. I think it's all about, all of these are error-prone modalities. They have accuracies that are not quite there yet. They're not quite at 90%. They're sort of 70, 80%, and each of them individually is there. The hope would be that by synthesizing them, then you can actually achieve the 95, 97% that you need to put these things into practice. Less aware of that than what you would be, Stan. So, if you know that, these are already being used in practice, and then thinking about how we can complement them, that would be really interesting to me.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, we see that with the exterior sensors of vehicles with LiDAR and camera and radar, and look at how you optimize them together to cover gaps. I think that would be a smart approach from the inside of the vehicle as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the data from LiDAR and cameras outside will definitely need to be integrated with data inside, regardless of whether we do EEG or visual. So yeah, I completely agree with that. I want to come, I'm not trying to move away. I'm seeing another question, but I'm happy to come back to this because we have a lot of time. When working through this research, what data did you come across that was the most surprising to you? I think the reliability of existing algorithms on from other studies on how reliably they could decode attention across time and how quickly. So within 300 milliseconds, you get 70 to 80% accuracies for decoding attention visually and where it is under very controlled environments, and with low density systems. So there's a lot of room for improvement there. I think that was surprising. The other side of bias, I think we didn't really expect the bias in EEG to be so evident from the data. We came up with metrics, and we sort of, and this is a shortcoming of the sort of EEG studies broadly. They don't have well-defined metrics to compare electrodes with. They're just like, they're looking at the data and they're saying, what does the brain do? But because often it's not engineers looking at the data, they're not asking, is the system good enough? That question, there's no quantified metrics for it. So we developed some metrics. There's one paper, Kappenman and Luck, which actually develops very nice metrics, and we are leveraging that and also advancing on that. And so if you look at those EEG metrics that we developed advancing on existing work, then we were surprised by how much our systems outperform existing systems on black hair. And I think that we weren't convinced that we are working on the right problem or an important problem. I think we get increasingly convinced, and then once that data showed up clinically, I think we were completely convinced. It was not us installing those systems, especially the classical EEG systems that are used in the clinic, but it showed a lot of improvement. So that was a happy surprise. The happy surprise that, oh, other people have already done what we are trying to do in terms of attention decoding, and there are these existing algorithms that do super well. That's really nice, because data in neuroscience is sparse and it's expensive to collect. These are collaborating labs. Barbsham Cunningham's lab had some really nice results over the last 2 years on decoding auditory attention. Visual attention, we have been involved in a collaboration with Marlene Berman. And so at least in space, so this is how I wanted to think about it. Like in space, where am I paying attention to spatially and auditorily is quite easily decodable, which is useful, I think, because it's like, oh, are you paying a lot of attention to your phone? Or in my case, kids at the back, which I'm sure I am. But at the important moments, what's going on? This is becoming too real. Somebody ran into my car 2 days back because they were not paying attention 3 days back. Did not think about that while preparing the talk, but yeah. Okay. As a student considering a career in research, what is something that you have learned during the career that students should know? Oh, this is so nice. Um, something that you've learned during your career. That's very nice. Okay, let me think. I think research at the intersection of disciplines is very important. It's easy to convince yourself that what you are doing is um, too simple or not important. But if you keep trying about a direction and related ideas at intersections of two or more disciplines, things show up. In this case, on sort of thinking about EEG and quick installing EEG and applications for quick installing EEG that don't occur in the clinic, right? Or in neuroscientific settings also, you don't really need quick install EEG. It's only in portable settings like drivings that you need that. The second is the importance of diversity of a team, not just in their skill set, which is very important, but in just races and genders, because then you learn about more problems. And finding the problem is the key thing. Solution, if you think about the problem deeply enough, you're well trained enough, it falls out and you'll get some solution, right? Maybe not the optimal solution, but finding a new problem is very difficult. And so having a diverse set of team or people that you interact with, from their backgrounds, from their understanding of the world, from their perception of the world, from their races, from their genders, really helps. This is putting me on the spot, but yeah. Okay. What do you think could happen, or what would you like to see happen with this research in the next 5 to 10 years? This is a great question. So in the next 5 to 10 years, one of the things that is coming out of UCSD over the last few years that I'm excited about is you can have non-contact EEG. So you don't actually have electrodes make a very good contact with the scalp. You are a few millimeters away, but you can still sense it. That would be great. We could embed that in the cap, and if it has limitations on spatial resolution, you have to use big electrodes and have capacitive coupling, but maybe that can decode attention very well anyway. And so sort of what can we do with few electrodes that are easy to wear in terms of reliability of what we are able to decode? That would be awesome. The second thing is, I think EEG in itself may not be sufficient, as I've indicated. Like, you will need to integrate multiple technologies to get sufficiently good reliability. I think any single technology may not be sufficiently reliable for you to take, decisions that the individual's life depends on. So integrating multiple modalities, multiple technologies will help. In this case, even just for neural sensing, I think EEG and FNIRS and other non-invasive sensing modalities, people are going crazy right now. People are developing magnetic sensing of the brain, which sounds, like, okay, you do electric, you can do magnetic too, but it's a serious advance over how the systems were for magnetic sensing, which, and still are. Like at Pitt, you have this huge squid machine, it's called, which sits on your head, and it's not portable at all, and it costs $1 million, which is like an MRI machine. But maybe we can integrate electrical, magnetic, optical sensors and get really good and reliable decisions about the brain activity. We can understand what the brain state is. Oh, you know what, today I'm not feeling this good. I need to pay better attention. I get warnings. I'm told that, hey, you're paying too much attention to your phone while driving or something like that. But just better assisting the driver in making the decisions that they're making would be great. But that's me thinking about just sort of driving as an application. Healthcare, of course, we are super excited about. Epilepsy, stroke, brain injuries, we are pursuing directions in there. On epilepsy and brain injuries, we are in the clinic right now. On stroke, we are hoping that we have something interesting to say, still discussing with clinicians there. By broadening the use of these electrodes for other disorders, migraine, strokes, etc., how do you feel you would like to expand your research? I want to understand this question a bit better. My sense, if it is about how it might expand my research, I think the joy of looking at any context, any specific practical context as an engineer is that once you understand the context really, really well, you realize that none of the existing solutions fit very well. This is, not always the case. Sometimes they do. Like I said, with classification, SVM just does the job as good as any other classifier that you would throw at the problem, especially kernel SVM for attention decoding. And I might be wrong, but pinch of salt and all that. But in most cases, once you like understand the problem really well, you're like, okay, now here is what you need to do. Like, you need to place the electrode here, build this kind of an electrode, and so on. So you need to integrate the solution nicely with the problem at hand. And as engineers, often we are just platform developers. We're like, okay, we'll build this, operating system, and then people will build their apps, and they'll be happy, and we'll have impact. But actually integrating with the end user, understanding their concerns, and developing a system that is designed for them, especially in these personalized settings like driving, healthcare, and so on, mobility broadly, is nice, because then you are able to address your solution, tailor your solution to the specific problems and concerns, which is also exciting because you interact with the end user in a much more direct way.
That is all of the questions that I had from the audience today, Pulkit. I appreciate you coming, and unless anyone has any other questions, we're gonna wrap it up.
Thank you, Joy.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for attending, and thank you, Pulkit, for sharing your work. As was mentioned earlier by Hajra, today's presentation will be posted on the Mobility 21 What's Happening page of our website, as well as a link with the video of the session, so it has been recorded. And also this afternoon, you'll be receiving an email asking you to take a short survey about today's SMC, so please take a few minutes to provide your feedback for us. We definitely appreciate it. And then finally, for students who are interested in engaging with transportation topics, I want to promote the Transportation Club as a way that you can get involved in transportation topics on campus with fellow transportation nerds. And then finally, our last SMC for this semester will be on Friday, December 3rd, and it will feature Sarah Fox. So please watch your email inbox for an invitation closer to that date. So yeah, thanks again, everybody, for attending. Great presentation. Definitely very interesting to learn about.
Thank you all.